Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you. Bert and Dot had been married for a long time. They loved each other. Now, Bert, his side of the story was that Dot could fly off the handle sometimes. So he learned to just walk very carefully around sensitive subjects. He noticed as they were aging that she might have what he perceived as a hearing loss, and he didn't want to confront her with it. So he called their family doctor and said, I think Dot may be experiencing some hearing loss. But I don't want to confront her. Tell me what I can do. He said, well, here's what you can do. When she's not facing you, stand about 40 feet away and just speak to her in a conversational tone. And if she doesn't respond, move 10 feet forward and do it again. And do it all the way until you can hear her. And then you can report back to me and let me know what's going on. So one night, she was in the kitchen. He stands back in the living room and he says, Dot, what's for dinner? No response. He moves 10 feet closer. Dot, what's for dinner? He kept doing this until he was about 5 feet away, and she finally turned around and said, Bert, it's chicken. I've said it 5 times. Let me introduce you to the psychological phenomenon known as projection. There's something going on with us, and we see it in other people. I first learned about this really in recovery, and the language we used was, if you spot it, you got it. And so we're not always seeing objective reality. And so sometimes when we're seeing things out there in the world that are upsetting to us, it's because it's connecting to something within us that is unhealed. Not always. I want to be clear with that. Sometimes it is our wholeness and our truth of the way the world should be. If we have a particular value, something that is incredibly important to us, and we're seeing it trampled in the world, we have a reaction to. But in my experience of being on this path for a long time, usually when I'm disturbed, the issue is here. That's why we're doing the workshop today after church, to begin to see if we can give ourselves more ease and peace with the way the world is by finding it here first. We're doing the Path of Freedom, Being, Becoming, and Belonging. This is week 2 of our Touchstone program. We do this every fall. We find a theme, and we explore it for 6 weeks because, sometimes we just have more to say than we can say in one sermon. So this first 2 weeks, we're talking about being. This comes from, we have our purpose statement, which was in community. We nurture and empower each other, transforming our lives that we may serve the world. And then we have 3 values, being, becoming, and belonging. Being, our statement of being says, we live from our oneness with God and each other, experiencing abundance and connection with all life. It's a beautiful statement of truth. While we are in the household of Christianity, we are an outlier here because we don't believe in a dualistic universe. We believe that God is present everywhere and in all beings. And that is we kind of get some peace around it. It feels, in the abstract, it feels pretty good. But then sometimes we're confronted with the reality, lower R reality, that some people, they sure don't seem to be acting there, that God's in that too. Really? And so the work that we're doing to gain our own personal freedom here is to heal it within us. That's the work. I love the name or the word oneness. We live from our oneness with God. It's a beautiful word. It's descriptive of this non-dual reality that we teach and believe in and practice. A synonym for it would be our church's name, unity. Everything is a unity. We are all connected. Everything. The best metaphor I have of this is the waves upon the ocean. Imagine an infinite ocean with an infinite number of waves upon it. Each wave may have individual shape, movement, speed, and yet if we look beneath the surface, guess what? It's all ocean. And so I'm a Michael wave. You're a Mary wave. You're a Susie wave. You're a Joe wave. We're distinct and unique, But underneath the situations, underneath all circumstances and forms, we are all part of this infinite good, this infinite creative energy that is God. And if that word bothers you, just use another. Every word we use, there's this thing I got recently, that God is a mystery, and the word God is a blanket that we throw over the mystery so we have something to point to, and so, yeah, that. But we'll never be able to fully comprehend or describe God. A couple more synonyms, oneness and unity, but also wholeness. If it's one thing, it must hold together as a wholeness. Not only in the whole, but in the individual expressions. We retain that wholeness. And another synonym, we have oneness, unity, wholeness, holiness. Everything is sacred. Everyone is a sacred being. Now, when I grew up in the fundamentalist Christian church, we didn't have to mess with all that. Because we could say, well, the ones who were on the right team, who said the right prayer, who got in the right church house, they're okay. But everybody else, we know where you're going. Eternal death and destruction. That's what you deserve. Did anybody else grow up with some of that? I don't know if it made sense to my soul, but I believed it because I was afraid of it. And so I got on the right team as quick as I could. But what I have learned and if that theology works for people, we don't want to disturb them. We're going to but for me, it no longer worked, and I needed something different. And when I was introduced to this teaching, at first I wasn't sure, because what do you mean the bad people don't get punished? How is that fair? But the longer I was with this teaching of oneness, unity, wholeness, holiness, I began to see that what we would call sin is a mistake. It's not a fatal flaw or a symptom of a deep essential depravity. No, essentially we are whole, but we get wrong ideas about that. And those ideas are installed by our family of origin, by the culture that we grow up in. And so our work, the path of freedom, is to reclaim the inherent goodness that we already are, to discover what lies in front of that. What are my belief systems? What are my identities that were never true of me, but I've been acting as if they're true my whole life? And this is what I've found. That work doesn't end. Even though I've been in this teaching for 31 years, actively engaged in a program of growth and self-development and healing, 10 years longer than that. I started therapy at 19. It has been a long journey, and man, it's annoying when I find I've still got stuff to heal. You'd think I'd be done right now. By now, don't you think? I mean, I got that REV in front of my name. Doesn't that mean anything? Does it mean anything, reverends? No, it means we're more responsible to do our work. That's really what it means. But at least in this teaching, we give you the opportunity to see that you don't have to fix all the stuff out there in the world. Your part is to fix the mistaken perception here. Jesus of Nazareth, who I believe was a non-dual teacher, he says this. I like it in the King James, even though it's a little poetic. It's the language that I know this verse in originally. The light of the body is the eye. Therefore, if thine eye be single, the whole body shall be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, thy whole body shall be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? It's very Shakespearean, but I love that. If thine eye be single, then thy whole body be filled with light. Now I'm going to read it in the New International Version so you can actually understand what it means. The eye is the lamp of the body. And if your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Can you perceive the metaphysics of this teaching? We experience what we're seeing. And we're seeing what we believe we are. And so if we look upon the world and are convinced of its darkness, that darkness will fill our consciousness. But if we look upon the world through this knowledge of unity, of wholeness, of singleness, of holiness, I don't know how God is going to be revealed as good in that situation, but I know God is there. And I anchor my faith in that, then my experience becomes one of light. And here's another thing. If we do this work long enough, we'll begin to feel a calling of how we can help. How we can contribute to the raising up of people who are still convinced they're in darkness. How we can begin to address situations in the world that do not reflect unity and wholeness. The work we do here is in consciousness, and the consciousness changes who we are, and it will result in changing our behavior. More on that later. But let's talk back about that. If thine eye be single. Our eye is often divided. And our eye is often just plain flat out lying to us. That we're seeing things that just aren't there, that just aren't true. Does anybody know the work of Byron Katie? Her work is called The Work. She's been here on this stage several times. And there's a process where you're really troubled by something. The question is that true? Do you know that that's true? It's a process of inquiry to begin to question our beliefs about what's happening in the world that's got us so upset. What's happening in our marriage that's got us so upset. What's happening in our body that's got us so upset. We begin to do this questioning of our own beliefs about it. And what happens, if you follow this work to its conclusion, you begin to see that that belief is not out there. It is in here. And that there is a sense of possibility and freedom within us if we can let go of the way we're seeing it. We think we're seeing objective reality. Everybody thinks they're seeing the world the way it is. And the truth is, none of us are seeing it fully as it is. We're seeing it through our filters. And as I mentioned, those filters are installed by, if it's not one thing, it's your mother. The family of origin. And those false beliefs, they go back generations of family trauma. The culture is filled with false beliefs about, think about racism. What a horrible false belief. And yet how long has it been with us? Continuing with us. We know it's false. We know it's false, but it still has power. Why? Because people continue to act from that belief that we're not all equal. We're not all expressions of God's light and love. So the work we do is to change our seeing. Change our seeing. Begin to see from our oneness with God. Byron Katie says this, when we argue with reality, we lose, but only all the time. How do we change ourselves? Well, you come to Unity for one 11 o'clock service, and I promise it's all fixed. From that point on, you're done. So take a nap. You know that's not true. It takes something, it's a dirty word, but it's not a four-letter word. The word is practice. Practice. You probably hear that word if you come here enough. We talk about spiritual practice. Our main practices in Unity are meditation and prayer. And we usually speak of affirmative prayer, where we pray from our oneness with God, rather than asking a distant God who may or may not answer our prayer to give us something we want. That's not the way we teach prayer here. But I think any prayer is okay. Anytime we're taken out of our judgment and going to divine source for help, I think it's a good thing. But prayer and meditation only work if you practice. You got to actually do it. You have to find time when you get out of the judgment, you get out of the busyness, and you take some time to pray and meditate. And for many people, those practices are difficult for all people, these practices are difficult to onboard. It takes practice to get good at the practice. But there are more practices. As I was preparing for this talk, I kept coming up with more and more ways that we can live from our oneness. Some of them you'll like, some of them you won't. But here's what I came up with this week, and see what you think. Study as a practice. Study. To get these teachings, you have to learn what they actually are. Start with Emily Cady's Lessons in Truth. The language, it was written in the 1890s, so you have to kind of go through some of the language, and if you're allergic to the Bible, you're not going to like much. But if you love the Bible, she has a whole new way of seeing the scriptures that she brings into that work. That whole book, that's really the starting of our literature and unity. She was asked to write, she's a metaphysical doctor in New York City, in the 1890s, 1880s. And she was a metaphysician, so she submitted, I think, an article. She wanted to be published in this new publication by the Fillmores called Unity. It's called something. I don't remember the name of it. Any of my Unity scholars know what it is? Modern Thought. I knew Reverend Shirley would have that right there. And they asked her to write 12 articles. And that is now in a book called Lessons in Truth. Study it, I'm telling you. And if that language doesn't work, pick up some Eric Butterworth. He took the same principles that Cady and the Fillmores used, but he wrote in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and it's a little bit more modern. Begin to study these things. And you have to take classes. I don't know any other way to do it. Maybe you don't have to, but I had to. Where I could have a teacher in front of the room sharing some principles and insights into them. Then I got to work it out by talking about it with my fellow students. It's a beautiful way to bring practice into your practice, to being study into your practice. Deep time eyes. This is a concept from the integral movement, of which you're going to hear about in the workshop today. We're only seeing it through our immediate needs, through our very short human lifespan. But if we can begin to see the whole evolutionary arc of human consciousness revealing itself, then it heals us to practice seeing things from a bigger perspective. You're really going to love this one. Patience. There's a myth about this that I'm going to bust right now. People have said, don't pray for patience because God will give you things you have to be patient about. You have things in your life you're going to have to be patient about, whether you pray for patience or not. The choice is, are you going to practice being patient? Are you going to practice letting something unfold here? Are you going to practice trusting a process that you cannot control? Trusting that other people are having a process and you cannot control it. To let something, who are my gardeners? Anybody like to dig in the dirt and plant stuff? That is a patient practice, isn't it? And I would also say gardening is a practice. As a matter of fact, James Finley, who was a novice, and he worked with Thomas Merton at the Gethsemane Monastery in Kentucky, he describes a contemplative practice as this: any act habitually entered into with your whole heart as a way of awakening, deepening, and sustaining a contemplative experience of the inherent holiness of the present moment. Anything you can do that brings you here, or into this moment where you recognize God is here and all is well. Planting in the garden can do that. Making sourdough bread is one of my contemplative practices. But patience, just to be able to sit with our discomfort, to sit with God's timing instead of my timing, it will change us. Grief as a spiritual practice. It's a hard one. Why is it that loss is universal but so little talked about? We all lose the people that mean so much to us. I've officiated so many memorial services of your family members, your husbands and wives. I know the holiness of the grief work. I don't have time to give a big talk on each one of these, but I was listening. I love podcasts. Let me just admit it. I love them. And they give me so much sermon material. Anderson Cooper has a beautiful podcast on grief. It's in his 3rd season that he's just done. And I sometimes get mistaken for Anderson Cooper when I'm out in the world. At least I used to. I don't know if I do anymore or not, even though I don't have blue eyes. But grief it's a healing process, but it's not without pain. Andrew Garfield, the actor who played Spider-Man, done a bunch of things, he was interviewed in the podcast that I listened to this week with Anderson Cooper. And these two men talked about losing family members. And with Anderson, he had lost his father and his brother and never grieved it. And then when his mother died, he was overwhelmed by the grief and had to address it. And so he was guided by or pushed or pulled into studying what he could get to help him. And that launched this whole journey. But Andrew Garfield talks about being, after his mom died of pancreatic cancer, and his mom was his person, walking along a beach on a cold October day in the UK, and he was just in that raw pain. Do you know that? Where it's just everything is itchy and uncomfortable. If you've experienced grief, you know this feeling. You can't find a place where you can settle into peace and feeling good. There's just this constant ache and hurt. And that stage of grief does pass. It really does. But you have to be present in it. And he was in that stage, and he was walking along, and he said he didn't even know that he was doing it, but he found himself, he took off all of his clothes, and he went into the ocean and submerged himself underneath the water, and he got a download. And he said it was from the ocean. And the ocean said to him, he said, it didn't come in words, but this is what I experienced. These are the words I would give it. The ocean said, I have watched sons lose their mothers for thousands and thousands of years. You have been initiated into a deeper reality, and it hurts. And then he let the ocean just hold him because he couldn't hold it by himself, and the ocean held him. That is a spiritual practice. He talks about brokenness in that story. We're so much about wholeness and power and creative energy, but sometimes it's okay to let ourselves be broken and let Spirit hold us, to let our friends hold us, to let our spiritual community hold us, to let life itself just hold us. In that humility and that surrender, you don't have to figure it out, and guess what? You can't. But there is something greater that can hold you. I think you will like this one. Immersion in nature as a spiritual practice. To just walk among the trees. Just to be out in some place that's green and alive. Or sometimes even in winter, even dead and alive, you can find healing there. Compromise is a spiritual practice. Oh, we don't like that one. I listened to another podcast, Julie Louis-Dreyfus's Wiser Than Me podcast with Jane Goodall, the primatologist. She's 90. She talks about there was a time in her career where she needed funding to do the work she was doing with the chimpanzees in Africa, and she had this really strong environmental streak, as many of us do, and she was like, I need money. I'm flying on this plane after being back in the West to try and gather money, and then she's like, and then when I get there, I'm going to be in a car. Those are both run on petroleum products. What if I went to an oil company and asked for them to partner with me? And she did, and Conoco funded her research. She got a lot of flack for it, but she recognized that she could find common ground even with an oil company and do good in the world. The Better Angels organization seeks common understanding by talking about our differences, and most of these are around our politics because that's where our differences show up in public. Not to persuade the other person who has a different perspective, but to eliminate the personal attack and the dehumanizing language that we give to the other side of any issue, and to arrive at something they call accurate disagreement, where we're just seeing the facts, not arguing with reality. This is important to them. That's what they're seeing. This is important to me. I'm not making it personal. And from that place, common ground can be reached. Compromise as a spiritual practice. And the last thing I want to share with you today is this idea that living from our oneness with God and each other, there's something else of oneness that we need. It's living in oneness with our humanity and our divinity, living in oneness with ourselves. There's something called welcoming prayer, where whatever is going on in your life, we make the experience of it welcome. In unity, we're usually taught, no, we deny it away. You know about the New Thought minister that found out we were wrong and he ends up in hell? Do you know this story? He get there and he just said, it's not hot and I'm not here. It's not hot and I'm not here. This is not theology, that's a joke. But to welcome the experience, not like if you get a cancer diagnosis, I don't want you to pray a prayer of welcome of cancer, but of your feelings about it. to make the fear welcome, to make your anger welcome. Just let the human experience be here. Jesus talks so much in metaphors, the beautiful parables, and one of my favorites is that of the wedding feast, where the king wanted to give a grand wedding feast for his son, and no one would come. They refused to come, and then the king sent people out to compel people in the highways and the byways to come to the feast. And I was thinking about that today. What if the marriage that Jesus was talking about, this is my metaphysical interpretation of it, is the marriage of the human and the divine within us? Is to reconcile that divide within us and welcome our humanity as part of our oneness with God and all that is. The great Persian poet Hafiz said this. Actually, he didn't say it in this language, and I've been told by my dear Ziba that this is not actually a translation, but an interpretation of the original Hafiz poetry. Love wants to reach out and manhandle us, break all of our teacup talk of God. If you had the courage and could let the beloved have his way, some nights he would just drag you around the room by your hair, ripping from your grip all those toys in the world that bring you no joy. Love sometimes gets tired of speaking sweetly and wants to rip to shreds your erroneous notions of truth that make you fight within yourself and with others, causing this world to weep on too many fine days. Yes, God wants to manhandle us, to lock us in a tiny room with himself and practice his drop kick. The beloved wants to do us a great favor sometimes, to hold us upside down and shake all the nonsense out. But when we hear God is in such a playful, drunken mood, most everyone I know quickly packs their bags and hightails it out of town. You're invited to the feast of having God shake the nonsense out of you. All of those ways that we have convinced ourselves of our unworthiness and our separation. And life is giving us opportunity after opportunity to examine it. Every time we come into a point of pain or a pattern that we keep finding in our lives, that is the universe itself shaking us, saying, wake up. You're doing this to yourself by your beliefs. It's not true. Let it go. And when we can finally marry our humanity and our divinity, recognizing that God is in all of it, holiness is waiting to be revealed in this wedding feast within us, then we can see the world with kinder eyes, and we're more available to bring good to this world. So we are honoring World Homeless Weekend today. I think that's it for my message. Thank you for being here. If nobody has told you today they love you, I love you. Thank you. Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.